and welcome back to another episode of Growing Pains. This episode is going to be a bit of a departure from the normal business side of things from games that we usually talk about. In this one, I'll be speaking with Rachel Miller. She's the product manager over at Reddit, specifically for Reddit Search and also the new Answers product. We dive pretty deeply into what it takes to build a tech product, specifically one like Reddit, which has so many users. I'm sure pretty much everyone listening here is quite familiar with it, and what it means to build a product for a community like that. I think it was quite a good contrast to the way that we build games. So I definitely think it's quite an engaging episode in looking at a bigger ecosystem in that sense from a community angle and how she perceives building that within the ecosystem that they have over Reddit. On top of that, Rachel's also super passionate about charity work and using tech for good. So towards the end of our conversation, we do turn more towards the ethical uses of technology and how you can use them and your time to contribute in a meaningful way to society. It was a really interesting conversation all around, and I think Rachel's super experience, it'll definitely come across in terms of the product sense of how much detail she knows about the space and what she sort of brings to the table there. And I hope that this is useful for you all and that you get to learn a little bit more about how tech is produced, especially from a product angle. So thank you again, and I'll catch you in the next episode.
So yeah, thanks for joining us today, Rachel. It's really good to have you here. And just to kind of start us off, could you just give us a little background about yourself, kind of the journey and sort of Reddit and product and what got you started there?
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. So I started in product probably about 5 years ago now. I've actually always been at Reddit, always working on search. So I started out
Hmm.
as an intern in college, ended up getting a return offer, and have been working on search experience since then. So specifically, what I manage is the front end experience. I've had experience managing back end as well, but I've shifted to focus on front end in the most recent two or
Hmm.
so years. And then I also have recently started working a little bit on Reddit's new product called Answers, which is what
Hmm.
I like to think of as a new way to search, essentially. It's using LLMs and summarizing a bit, but it gets you straight to the content still. Like, we know that that's what
Okay.
people come to Reddit for. So those are my main products. And then on the side, I volunteer at a nonprofit called Taimaka, which is
Hmm.
essentially revolutionizing the way that malnutrition care works by using digital tools to lower the cost of entry for people to get treatment and therefore allowing more treatment.
Sweet. So yeah, a lot of stuff around, I guess, tech and everything. Did you always know you wanted to kind of go down this route with, I guess, tech and product? I think your degree was in something completely different, right?
So I started out college thinking I was going to be a vet. So I
Yeah.
studied biology for 2 of those years, spent my summers and, like, after school and vet clinics, and then I think I just eventually had a realization that I don't wanna go to vet school, and I also started just hearing more and more about tech and how it's gonna be the future,
Hmm.
and so I thought, "Okay, well, if I go into technology, then I can probably ultimately work in any industry because technology will be in every industry." So I
Yeah.
thought it opens up a lot of options, and so why not understand the fundamentals? So I ended up studying computer science and cognitive science, and
Cool.
then throughout that experience realized that coding was not my passion, but I did still
Yeah.
want to stay in tech. So I tried out a few different things, landed on product management, and have kind of known ever since.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, product is, I think it's a really cool role. Like in the game world, it's more akin to like game design side of things. So really understanding the logic of, how these things are put together and creating that roadmap, right? I guess, how did you find product as a role? You said you experimented with a few different things. How did you end up landing specifically on that? And what's the product role in terms of how you see it and what made you like it the most?
Yeah, so it was actually kind of by accident. So I ended up interning for a really small startup one summer in San Francisco, and it was originally supposed to be more user research and design. But then
Hmm.
it was a very, very small startup, so there were like 3 employees, and then the designer quit like 2 weeks into my internship.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I became the designer, and then I also ended up shadowing the CEO, and I think in a lot of really small environments, the CEO is also the product manager.
Yeah.
So I ended up helping out with product stuff. I really enjoyed it, so I thought, "Okay, well, next time, the following summer, I should make sure I'm applying to product stuff as well as engineering." Because I thought, engineering is like the default that people go into from a computer science degree, but let's also apply to product as well.
Okay, cool. And then talk me through product at Reddit. You obviously worked in, a lot of different sides, search with answers and everything. how does that work? Going from a startup, you discovered product from CEO side, being kind of vision holder for essentially all facets of it. Now you're in a big organization managing sort of a chunk of the whole product itself. What's that transition like? And like, how does product at Reddit actually work with, all the different pieces going on?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that my experience when I at least started at Reddit was not too far off of a startup. So when I joined, it was only about 700 people, which I know is big for a startup, but
Okay.
I think smaller than what most people would expect Reddit to be because I think at that stage it was like 16 years old. So
Yeah.
I would say that for the ratio of amount of traffic to number of employees, it was still very much kind of scrappy and not super, super well planned out. And you have a lot of agency over what you get to work on. So I wouldn't say that there were like huge, huge differences in that sense. Of course, the user base is much, much larger. But I would say product in general at Reddit, I don't have anywhere else to compare it to. So I can't say,
Mhm.
it's better or worse than some other companies. I will say that the product managers are definitely very cross-functional, and I rarely see product managers who are actually diving into the code. I know that there are PMs who do some coding and then they also
Mhm.
manage the product, but at least at Reddit, I don't see that very much. And then generally, it's divided by surface. So the search experience is generally the search product, and so I would manage that. And then they, depending on the product and how technical it is, there might be a PM for the back end and a PM for the front end. So feeds, for example, might have a back end and front end PM. So that's what we have on search. So I started out managing both teams with front end and back end. So
Mhm.
that would be search
Cool.
relevance. What's the ordering of the results when you type in a certain query, and then we ended up
Mhm.
hiring a front end team, and then which is now what I focus on. And that's what does the search results look like? Do we show any special units depending on the query that you type? So they're closely tied together, but one is definitely more UX focused now.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think, with AI coming in, a lot of it's becoming UI UX focused in terms of how people are actually just experiencing these products more than anything else. So, I mean, talk me through the search product that you work on. What's like a general day? How do you build that backlog? How do you sort these results to be what's the most relevant for this user? How do you actually map that all out?
Yeah, so it's one thing I wish people understood more is that search relevance is a very difficult problem. I think when you think
Yeah.
about search, you're like, oh, you just match the terms, right? If the term is in the query and if it's in the result, then that's a good result. But the problem is that Reddit has 20 years worth of data. So that's billions
Mhm.
of posts. So yeah, if you're just looking at exact term matches, you're going to get a ton of results back. So you have to consider quite a few different things. You have to think about, is it fresh? Is this kind of query something where someone will want recent results, or is it what we would call an evergreen query, where it means the results don't change very often, and so it's okay if they're a little bit more outdated?
Mhm.
Another thing to consider is what is the quality of the comments and the engagement in the post. So maybe it has a ton of upvotes, but it's not that engaging. Does that mean, is that
Mhm.
a better or neutral signal depending on the query? It is a tricky problem. And then I would say the front end problems are a little bit easier in the sense that if
Okay.
we understand what the query is looking for, then we can
Mhm.
show the right kind of UI. But you have to understand what the query intention is first. And I think that's the trickier part because we see a lot of shorter queries come in.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
two words like, or a single word query like Apple, like most likely it's talking about the tech company, but it could be talking about like the most recent Apple poisoning scandal or something like
Yeah.
that.
Okay. So how do you actually look at managing that then? Like there's so much going on here, like you said, and a lot of this is legacy data. Like how do you actually sort through all that, filter it? I mean, that's like huge amounts of data processing, and this is before AI.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is honestly done by the engineers. The things that I would think about when I was managing that team was looking at the ranker that we use, the algorithm that we use, and thinking about all the different levers that we have to pull. So we have information about like upvotes, number of comments,
Mhm.
freshness, term match, and then there's like more complex ways to look at terms. So I think it's the formalized term is like a vector search where you turn all of the terms
Mhm.
into vectors and then map them out. And so you look at all of these different options you have and then you make a decision about, which ones you want to rank or weight more highly, and then that will ultimately give you your final results.
Okay, cool. And then I guess just coming into Reddit, you're coming into almost a legacy system, right? How do you look to update that with bringing in new features to the product with like, building search more? Like how do you basically work with what's there already, but then also
Yeah.
build for the future.
Yeah, so one of the first projects I ever did was rebuild the entire search product.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To essentially do what you were saying, like, is running all this on all this old legacy code. It wasn't sustainable. It was breaking all the time, that sort of stuff. And we knew we needed something where we could iterate more quickly, and
Mm.
bring new features on, experiment, etc. So I actually did that in 2021, I believe, where we moved all the backend logic to a completely new system that would be able to better support all the new things we wanted to build.
Okay, nice. That sounds like a nightmare. I'm not gonna lie.
Quite the first project, I will tell you. It gets you very familiar with the product, having to map it out.
Yeah, I guess good way to, get to know the team as well. You're kind of just thrown right into the middle of things.
Totally.
Okay, cool. So how does that like work in terms of them product and you're working with a lot of different people, a lot of different stakeholders? What's your kind of team build up look like in terms of who you're interacting with on a daily basis, how you're kind of communicating across the streams and everything?
Yeah, so I'd say the people I interact with the most are probably engineering managers, because they have a pretty good view of where the rest of the engineers are at in terms of, okay, this project is maybe 50% done, they're blocked on XYZ thing. So I'd say primarily engineering managers and other product managers.
Hmm.
But because the search experiences team is a little bit more contained, so we mostly are focusing on building products on the search product, not like building products on other teams' surfaces. So like the post
Yeah.
page, for example. Most of our work is kind of in one area. Beyond that, I think I do work with IC engineers a little bit, in the sense that every
Hmm.
time we start a project, we'll have a kickoff. I will show them the specs, etc., and then we'll go back and forth about any questions or revisions that need to be made, especially throughout the development process as well. Like, they'll just message me and be like, "Yo, what is this requirement saying? Do we still need to do
Yeah.
it? Not?" Other people, of course, we got designers. They're very important. I work with them quite a lot, as well as we have the legal, communications, policy teams. So I would say that not every project requires me to collaborate with them, but
Hmm.
if there are ones that might have maybe more sensitive data or something like that, then we would consult with them and just make sure that they're happy with whatever we're building.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then, so I guess there's different product teams at Reddit where you're kind of building everything cohesively together into like a wider unit and everything, right? How does that separation kind of work when you're, building one component of a product and then maybe another team is also building something in parallel or something that's supposed to kind of sit on top of or around it? How do you kind of manage that system that you're not like crossing wires or anything?
Yeah, it can definitely be tricky. I would say that so far it hasn't been too bad, again, because we mostly focus on just building products on our surface, and we're the only people that
Hmm.
build stuff on search.
Okay.
So the most common case where this might become an issue is if someone, maybe like the posting flow team or something, they want to integrate some search feature into their product. In that
Hmm.
case, sometimes maybe they won't let us know, or we'll need to like get in the loop early just to make sure that whatever they're trying to build makes sense, it works with our framework, etc. But I would say that doesn't happen very often, because most of the time search is just kind of plugging along in our little search world.
Yeah, fair enough. No, it's always good to kind of have your own thing, right? And then you can just kind of be like, I can just dig into this, no need to worry about the rest of the company at the same time. Okay. So I guess just diving deeper into duties as a PM and the features that you're building, scoping them out. What does that process look like when you have this backlog, when you're looking to actually scope these features, get a team on board? How do you prioritize those? And how does that kind of inform what's already kind of needing to be built, what's been built, and where you're going with kind of new things coming in and you need to pivot to like adapt?
Yeah, so I think generally the product manager role, it goes in cycles depending on where you are in the quarter. So I guess you
Hmm.
could say that the cycle would start at the end of the quarter, where you're starting to plan for the next quarter. So usually about like a month before the quarter starts, all of the product managers, engineering managers, leadership, whatnot, start thinking about, okay, what projects do we want to prioritize this quarter? So we
Hmm.
would take a look at a backlog, brainstorms. If we haven't done brainstorms, then we'll host them at this point, to gather all the ideas, talk to other teams, see if they're planning to do anything. Then we get a big list of them, and then attempt to prioritize based off of the constraints that we have. So constraints could be number of engineers, engineering time, number of
Yeah.
projects that need to roll over from the previous quarter. So this is a point where I'll talk quite a lot with the engineering manager and be like, okay, realistically, what are we going to get done in the next month? How many should we roll over into the next quarter and account for in the next quarter? And then also thinking about how it aligns with strategy. So, is it actually solving the user problems we want to target? And then also is it aligning with the high level strategy we established at the beginning of the year? And
Mhm.
then once all of that is done, we'll have our set of prioritized projects, and then we'll have start of the quarter, engineers kick off, start building, and then we get into the kind of experimentation cycle of we build it, run an experiment, see what it's doing, see if we want to ship it or iterate, etc. And
Mhm.
kind of go through all that until you get to the end of the quarter and repeat it all.
Yeah, rinse and repeat, right? It's
Yeah.
just never ends. It's an endless cycle. There's always more things to do with these things.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. And okay, fair enough. And then are there any cases, for instance, where you're, partway into a sprint in building a feature or something, and you're like, actually, we need to pivot to do something completely different, and like, this is not the direction we need to go. Like, how do you find that out? How do you decide to kind of stop and like reorganize and move directions when you're like, oh no, I've already spent like a week or two doing this. I want to like ship this. How do you kind of
Yeah.
balance that out?
I mean, I think it really depends on a case by case basis. There are some situations where, you know, some leadership has said, we are doing this. And so it's like, all right, we're doing this. And I think
Yeah.
there are other situations where maybe a request comes in and there's more room for discussion. So maybe we
Hmm.
might compromise and say, okay, like we won't build it, but we can advise you on how to build it. So then we don't get sidetracked, but that team can still run the experiment that they wanted to run. So I think it does really depend on who's making the ask, at what point in the quarter it is. Like, maybe
Mm.
we do actually have a little bit of extra room, probably not, but, it really varies case by case.
Okay, interesting. And then I guess just looking at from that direction, obviously you've got so many different, I guess, inputs there, right? You've got from stakeholders, you've obviously got from the overreaching sort of goal of the company and everything, from your team and everything. How do you communicate across these streams? Because the way you speak to an engineer is not always the same. You're going to speak to a stakeholder at senior level. How do you manage those expectations and get everyone aligned on one thing?
Yeah, I would say a lot of meetings and a
Yeah.
lot of Slack messages. That is really the key. Communication is, I think, one of the key components of being a good product manager.
Hmm.
So, you've got lots of chaos and you're going to have to distill that down in the right way for the right audience. So, like you mentioned, if it's a legal stakeholder, you're not going to go in depth into the technical discussion because that's not helpful for them. Whereas with an engineer, like it's fine to have a
Hmm.
discussion that's a little bit more technical. So I think knowing your audience is definitely important to prepare for meetings and just generally prepare for meetings. A surprising amount of
Yeah.
people don't prepare in advance, and I always like to come with an agenda beforehand, if possible. When I send the invite, even just write something light to just let them know, like, this is what we're going to talk about. This is why I've put this here, because otherwise it's just. I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit less efficient if you just throw a meeting on someone's calendar. They have no idea what you're going to talk about, and then they might not have the context that they need
Hmm.
to have an efficient meeting.
No, 100%. I've been in too many meetings, and I think everyone who's probably listening to this has been in enough where it's just like you're just going in circles and
Yeah,
nobody actually knows what they're doing then. It's like, yeah, we're gonna have another meeting next week. So yeah, having notes is definitely a good thing. And I mean, thank you as well, because I got a lot more notes from you than I did from most of my other guests. Just saying that, putting
product
that out there.
managers, man. I'm telling you.
It's just how it goes. I mean, hey, it's good to keep organized, right? Like it definitely helps in terms of knowing what you're doing and where you're gonna go. So
Yeah.
but so many times I think in the working life boat, it's always a lot of pointless meetings at times and a lot
Mhm.
of just confusion in terms of what's happening. Being able to distill that chaos down into an actionable roadmap and path is just so important.
Mhm.
I guess
Yeah.
on the flip side of that, a lot of people are now going, product people, we don't need them as much, or you need to
Mhm.
have a lot of different multifaceted skills, whether we mentioned technical PMs or PMs that
Mhm.
also designers. Do you think PM as a role on its own is sustainable in most organizations, or do you also need to start like mastering different avenues, especially now that AI can kind of help expedite a lot of these mentioning meetings and things? There's so many tools now that can track your meetings and give you those talking points. So what does like the role of a PM look like as technology is also evolving and able to manage some of those components?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this is a question that is on a lot of people's minds. Like, is AI just going to take my job in the next 3, 6
Yeah.
months or whatnot? Of course, I can't tell the future, but I think what's key here is just evolving with the AI. Like you mentioned, like leverage these technologies. Don't just try to push them aside because they are going to come. They're already here.
Yeah.
So see if you can use it to make yourself more efficient. I do think that product management, I mean, it depends on your product, but it can involve quite a few different processes that I think are going, at least in the near future, to be on the more difficult side to replicate in terms of
Hmm.
like end to end, do a whole quarterly planning and do all of the things required by a product manager. I think there are definitely components of it that are going to be automated, like you mentioned, like the note taking, figuring out AIs, figuring out meeting topics, etc. But I still do think being able to fully replace a product manager is still hopefully at least a few years out.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, also depending on how technical the product is as well and how
Hmm.
complex it is, how integrated it is into the ecosystem, the rest of the company. So, yeah, I mean, fingers crossed is the hope that it's not going to be automated out quite too soon.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, that's what we're all hoping, I think, across the board these days. But yeah, so I mean, looking at that, looking at obviously, you've done the search piece now. You said you're also looking at the answers component. How did those products kind of go hand in hand, and what's like the evolution there in terms of how you see that product evolving? Is answers essentially just an extension for search, or is there something else there as well?
Yeah, I think that's evolving, honestly. So the product launched in January, and I actually was not super involved with it. Like I gave some feedback on
Uh-huh.
it, and there was like this tag team that was building it, sort of in a very scrappy way, honestly.
Yeah.
And so it's very much still a new product, and I think we're trying to figure out, where exactly does it fit. We know that people want to see discussions and comments that are happening on Reddit, and the general search landscape is changing. So
Hmm.
people, the way that you search on Google is changing. People are
Yeah.
searching Google less and they're using new avenues. They're looking at TikTok and Instagram to start searching. So I think we're in the process right now of figuring out how do those two play together? How can we make sure that they're complementing each other to give people options of, okay, do I want something a little bit more summarized or do I want to do my own digging? And I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that I don't have an exact answer right now, but that's something that we're thinking about.
Yeah, because I mean, in sort of the wider discourse of just search in general, right? Everyone's like, "Oh, people are using ChatGPT for everything now, or any
Yeah.
of this. Is Google search engine even going to survive long term?" And I know
Mhm.
obviously they have a deal with you guys, right? Like Google and Reddit for
Mm.
both getting data and then also, I guess, pumping Reddit up. Has that helped at all, or is it still
Yeah.
kind of
That is actually an entirely separate team. There's an entire team dedicated to, like, SEO and managing that relationship, which I actually don't know much about. So,
okay?
maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. But that is definitely, part we recognize that people do that. People come to Reddit through Google for sure.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, fingers crossed, I guess, that all of these products coexist and we get a lot more just of different kind of streams and avenues to get information in the future.
For sure.
But yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of these companies are still for profit, so some things usually do get cut. But we can all hope.
Yeah.
So yeah, going into more of that side in terms of looking at technology evolving, looking at bringing in and incorporating AI, and like Reddit itself being essentially a technology company, how do you look at new changes like AI? How's that been incorporated into your workflow? How's that changing the way that you run product or that these products are even being built, and how the company's looking to grow in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to, what the rest of the company is doing in terms of approaching AI products because I do focus on search. But I will
Hmm.
say for myself personally, like when I'm looking at developing AI or which includes ML or LLM sorts of products, I
Hmm.
definitely feel like I approach it with more care because I there's already, in my opinion, pretty high stakes because we have, X million number of people coming
Yeah.
and searching every day. So that's a lot of people that are going to be exposed to your product. But especially when you start to incorporate I think you need to be particularly careful about the data that you're inputting, as well as just the model that's being used and trained, how it's being trained, et cetera. So like I usually go through quite a few different questions as I'm developing the product. So for the training data portion, I might ask myself, okay, so we selected this set of data. Maybe it's like we
Hmm.
look at user upvotes and comments or something. Why
Yeah.
did we select this? Is there a reason that we could have done more or less? I'm thinking about quality controls. So, like, is the data going to go stale? Do we need to refresh it X
Hmm.
amount of times? What's appropriate? What's feasible? What's within cost limits, etc. And then, of course, all of the risks and mitigations. So I like to write out every single risk that could happen. So, like, what can go wrong if the model
Yeah.
underperforms? What can go wrong if the model overperforms? And trying to write out mitigations for each. Of course, you can't predict the future, but I think it's
Yeah.
helpful to at least think through what you're building really thoroughly because think too often we just get excited about new technology and we're just like,
Yeah.
let's just build this thing as fast as possible. But especially when you're building for millions and millions of people, like there are implications. So you need to be careful
Yeah. No, for sure. Got to understand how this can impact all your users, I guess,
for
especially when
sure.
you are, especially a consumer facing product, right? Like it's
Mhm.
very different compared to the business side where I think, like you mentioned in a previous talk that I heard you in, where you have all these feedback points, you have all these people coming back and either complaining about the product or I don't know how many of them say nice things about the product in Reddit, but it is a big thing, I guess, to just balance out when you have such a huge kind of voice from the consumer side to put into like every decision that you're making. How do you balance that when you're looking at obviously scoping this out, looking at incorporating new technologies and like evolving this product? You already know that there's like this vocal group that's always kind of going to be on your back being like, hey, I hate this feature, I hate you like took that down or did this. Like
Yeah.
how does that come into play when you're looking at building, and how much of a voice do consumers have in a product like this versus obviously you having the internal roadmap needing to obviously align with internal stakeholders in terms of the direction of the company and the product that you're building? How do you balance those two streams?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I would say if you are posting in the feedback channels that exist on Reddit, we do see them. So you are not being thrown into a bottomless pit or whatnot. Like we do take a look at those. So we do take them into account, especially for bugs. I think that's a great way to make sure that we're not breaking things, but I think it's just one of many things we consider. So we also run formalized user research where I think we have a bit more
Hmm.
control over who is going into the study because usually the people who are speaking out on Reddit are the most passionate and it's a very small
Yeah.
subset of people. Whereas with user research, we're able to more explicitly target, okay, people that maybe don't use Reddit search regularly versus people who do. And that I think is a little bit more representative and
Hmm.
fair because then we know we're not just getting the most passionate set of people. And then, of course, the other thing we look at is data. So we're always going to be
Yeah.
looking at all the metrics and stuff that we're tracking, seeing what people are actually doing, because I find that there can be differences between what people say they want and then what people actually
Yeah.
end up doing, which can be a tricky balance because you want to listen to your users and you want to do the user research, but there's just, yeah, there's some psychology logic behind it that people often don't
Yeah.
know what they want. So you have to look at a bunch of different things, I think.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff on, I guess, the intrinsic behavior that they actually do versus what they say they
Mhm.
want. And balancing that, I think that's a big thing in both games as well, where it's like, how much do you put in those extra game features or extra levels
Mhm.
that this person says they want, but actually nobody's playing?
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I can definitely see that. And it is a nightmare. Like I think building for consumer in general is just like you mentioned, the vocal minority, their voices are a little bit too loud for the space they take up at times. But still consumers still gotta look after that bunch as well. So
Sure.
no, building across the board is definitely a rough thing. And then you talk me through, I guess, where you're building the product, you've shipped a new feature. How do you evaluate this? How do you evaluate, like, was it a success? Is this really the right direction that you want to go to? And like, does it ever get scrapped? So you've already built something, you've shipped it, like, would you scrap that if the metrics aren't showing up?
Yeah, so I don't think we've actually trying to think if there are any products we've actually deprecated. So when I joined Search 5 years ago, it was a very, very small team. I think there were like maybe 8 engineers, 8 to 10 engineers.
Hmm.
Now we've grown to be much larger, but because Search historically, I mean, I think there's quite a reputation that Reddit search
Yeah.
is bad. And it wasn't really funded that well when I started. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing is more on the foundational side. So
Hmm.
because of that, we aren't really scrapping many projects because a lot of them are sort of essential things that you would want to have.
Yeah.
In terms of other kinds of launches. It really depends on how big the launch is. So if it's something that's like a brand new feature, 0 to 1 sort of thing, and we think people will be really excited about it, in that case, we would work with the communications team. They would work with their media outlets, and then they would essentially invite people to write about this product. So I think that's one
Mhm.
signal you can get. And then even if you don't have that big media splash, there's always, of course, the numbers. You can see if people are actually using it more. Does it stay the same? Is it growing over time, et cetera? But I guess it can be tricky, especially when you want to just move on to the next product to continuously
Mhm.
be kind of looking back and being like, oh, should we
Yeah.
actually keep this thing? So I do find that challenging.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. And then, like, do you have any advice in terms of specifically looking at retros? Like, say you've shipped this thing, you've got a couple of like weeks or months of data. I think one of the things I see a lot of teams, both games, tech, like everywhere I've worked with, struggle with is like having time for that retro rather than running on to the next thing
Yeah.
and really going in, diving deep into like, was this effective? What can we do better? Like, how do you make time for that and like lead a session like that where it's effective in terms of getting those learnings? What's sort of the right amount of time to look at if this product did go well? And because often what I see is you have, the cycles where everyone's like, oh, we work in agile ways. We have the 2 week sprints, so we have an automatic retro at the end of it. But I don't
Mm,
really see what, like, I know what happened in the last 2 weeks in terms of what might have gone wrong in the building, but I don't
yeah.
see the outcome of the product itself. And nobody usually comes back then and says, let's have a month retro for that feature that we shipped like a month ago and see have things changed? Is there anything new that we can kind of learn from that and take into our current sprints or into the future? So how do you look at like organizing these retros from a
Listen.
perspective of learning what's been kind of going wrong initially, but then also from a longer term perspective of how did this project kind of pan out?
Yeah, yeah. I do think we could definitely do better in terms of evaluating products that have already launched. Because I would say that doesn't happen that frequently in terms of like coming back 6 months later and evaluating something. We do two different types of retros pretty regularly though. So one is like the weekly sprint or
Mhm.
biweekly sprint that you mentioned. So that's for the more, I think, detailed things. So what happened
Yeah.
exactly this week, what could have gone better. One thing that I find helpful is we'll always review action items from the previous week and be like, "Hey, did this get done?" If it didn't get done, then we'll move it on to like this week's AIs. So I think that does actually help with the accountability a little bit. But the other type of retro that I always try to run for big products, so ones that are pretty user facing, they might be a pretty big change, or maybe it was
Mhm.
very cross functional. Once that product has shipped, or we've decided not to ship it, then I will actually run a retro and go through each different stage. So I'll have a section for process and planning. I'll have one for execution, building, etc., and then one for experimentation, and then making a decision about shipping, so that we can kind of break down the whole product life cycle a little bit more. Because otherwise, I think it can be a little overwhelming to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you're trying to just get everything in one go, it can definitely be a bit much for everyone in the team, and then nobody actually ends up talking about anything.
For
So no,
sure.
splitting it out is definitely good. I guess on that, is there anything that's just been really surprising in terms of something that came up in a retro or in terms of feedback or in terms of just building that you're just like, wow, that's just so out there. Like I hadn't even considered any of this.
Um, hmm. I don't think so, really. I think most of it. Maybe it doesn't come as a surprise because as we're going through it, I can kind of mentally notice like, "Oh, like that kinda went wrong. We should probably talk about that in the
Yeah.
retro." So I don't feel like usually at the retros there's anything particularly like, "Oh, whoa, I had no idea that that had happened." But I think mostly it's just more small things about communication on certain parts of the projects, and just making sure that that communication changes or structure in some way. So
Yeah.
usually nothing too spicy.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, no, I think at least on the game side, we've definitely had a lot of, and I think a lot of it is the communication issues, right? Like
Mhm.
you have a lot of siloed teams at times, especially when you're working across streams, working with different types of people, like whether it's engineers or designers, and you need to give them different types of tasks, different ways to speak to them, like we've already discussed.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, especially if you then decide to go on holiday or something, and they're just kind of left to their own devices, they don't know how to speak to each other, and you're like, okay,
Uh-huh.
clearly, we need a guidance doc for everyone being like, yeah, this is how
Yeah.
you do this.
So
Yep,
very,
yep,
very
yep.
much hand holding with those people. But no, okay, that's cool. So yeah, I guess going into now developing products with AI, I know we've briefly kind of touched on it, and then we're kind of diving deeper. Obviously, you said for you, it's very important to kind of understand the ramifications of a product in terms of how you're building it, how it's going to impact all the people that are going to be using it. I guess diving deeper, I know you're also quite interested in looking at the ethical side of how these products are built. So, can you talk me through sort of your framework of making sure that what you're building is aligned with kind of the outcome for being good for the users itself, rather than just purely for the capitalist money side of things?
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. That's it's tricky and it's complex. I guess I can offer what I find that's helpful, and
Hmm.
I think that's just gonna be a small subset of the many things you can do. But I think it is important to incorporate this throughout the entire product lifecycle. So don't just think about risk once you've essentially already built the model and it's
Hmm.
out there and you're evaluating it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really needs to start at the very, very beginning where you're understanding the user and the problem really well. So at that point, when you're looking at the users, I think with AI products, a lot of the time you might think that you're just impacting one or two users or one or two user groups, but actually there might be a much wider set of people that are going to be impacted by it. I think in the best case, you're not always going to have the time and resources to do this, but you'll spend a little bit of time brainstorming all of the potential people, and then you're going to have to narrow it down to the ones that are most likely to be impacted, or maybe the user groups that are the
Hmm.
largest, and start there. So, you prioritize them to start, and then maybe in the next iteration, you can go back and look at your list of people and then start to think about the maybe smaller groups. I think that's
Yeah.
usually the way to approach it, is recognize there are a lot of people and problems and stakeholders out there, and then prioritizing the ones that you absolutely have to, I don't know, think about or adhere to or listen to, and then, go from there. Go from there essentially.
Okay. And how would you approach that prioritization? Because I think that's something a lot of people struggle with. Obviously, you said like it's a skill that you develop as a PM, but like what comes into the thought process of, okay, I'm going to filter these down like this?
Yeah, I think it depends on, like, who you're talking about. Like, if you're talking about users versus internal stakeholders, I think
Hmm.
internal stakeholders is a little bit easier because there are some times when the policy team will be like, "No, this is a blocker, you cannot, like, we will not allow you to do it." Or
Yeah.
legal will say like, "No, there's literally a law that says, like, you can't do this or you should change it in some way." So that's pretty obvious, like, we have to
Yeah.
do
More
this.
cut and dry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. With users, I think it kind of usually will go down to the numbers. So if we know
Okay.
that 10 million people are in this user group and they'll be impacted versus like 1 million. Of course, that's still a lot of people on both ends,
Mhm.
but again, you only have finite amounts of time and energy, et cetera. So
Yeah.
probably you're going to focus on the 10 million. And then the other thing to think about is like, how bad is it for certain user groups? So if there's a user group where like, if you don't change this thing, they can't use Reddit search at all. Well, probably, we should focus on them versus the people who can still use Reddit search, but maybe the UI looks a little bit janky, for example. So that would
Yeah.
be lower priority than the people who just can't use Reddit search at all.
No, Hearthpen. That's actually been, I think, a big thing with Reddit, right? Like you had a lot of side projects where a lot of it was around the UI UX side, because especially looking
Mhm.
at things like the mobile interface and all of this, like you mentioned, you essentially rebuilt search 5 years ago now. So
Yeah.
how does that actually look from the product side in terms of usability? Is that sort of a big thing that Reddit's focusing on right now, or
In terms of making it more like user
like
friendly.
user friendly? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that the company has recognized is that Reddit is really good if you get Reddit,
Yeah.
in the sense that you understand how it's organized, you understand how to get to the communities that are of interest to you. And I think that's something that we definitely still struggle with. Like, this is not just a search only problem. One of the first things that I think people do when they come to Reddit is they try to search. So I think we are an important part of the funnel. But yeah, I think it's definitely just a struggle to help people understand such a complex ecosystem when there's not
Yeah.
really anything like that. Like Instagram and Facebook are very individual centric. And
Hmm.
so I think people understand that model. But when you start to think about community centric platforms, it's a bit newer to people.
Yeah, I mean the main examples I can think of are just Reddit and like Discord, for instance, as the big players,
Hmm.
and again very different in terms of how they structure their communities and how you can kind of go through the different tabs of what's happening. I
Hmm.
know the Reddit well is very hard to navigate when you first come across it. I'm still a novice Redditor. I wouldn't say I can actually understand how half the things work there.
Yeah.
But no, there's so much information. There's so much just knowledge there, and like you said, getting filtered through to the right thing,
Yeah.
it's incredibly hard. Like especially if it's a new user, you don't have any information on them. Whereas with an existing one, at least you can kind of direct that in some ways.
Yeah.
So how do you build for that? Like how do you build for a new person coming in, looking at a community for the first time, or if they don't even have an account, right? You don't necessarily have the
Hmm.
trackers for them, especially looking at, across the globe with Europe
Yeah.
having GDPR, US not. Like how does that work then when you're seeing just new people come onto the platform now?
Yeah, so there's an entirely separate team that's dedicated to onboarding. So I genuinely have very little sense of what's going on over there. But I guess from the search perspective, what we're hoping to do is I think relevance is very, very important, but
Hmm.
also just making the UI obvious in terms of like, okay, this what r slash means is it's a community, and then
Yeah.
telling you, how, showing the little community icon that can be an indicator of what might be inside, or maybe giving a short description of what the subreddit is about, for example. So the little UI things are helpful. Ultimately, goes down to the relevance being good because even if the UI is nice, but then it's completely
Yeah.
irrelevant, it's not super helpful. So I think about the UI side, and just making obvious how the different types of content that are on Reddit. I think
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
alone is a bit confusing because we've got
Yeah.
primarily posts, but we also have communities, we've got comments, we've got media, we've got people. So making it super explicit what you're looking at and when you're looking at it. And then the other thing that I know is quite challenging for people to understand is we actually have different types of scope search. So there's global
Hmm.
search, which means you're searching across all of Reddit, but you can actually search within communities and within
Hmm.
people's
Hmm.
profiles. And it's difficult for people to, number one, understand that concept, and number two, know when they are in a particular scope. So
Yeah.
that's something that definitely goes down to the UI to be like, okay, this is how this concept works, and you are doing it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, no, cool. I mean, that is one thing I think I've definitely also struggled with where I'm on Reddit. I'm just like, okay, am I searching everything? Am I searching just this thread?
Hmm.
But then yeah, so we're going back to I guess some of the stuff in terms of the ethical development for AI for products. You had some several like frameworks that you use, especially looking at things like tech for good,
Hmm.
building it towards that. Do you want to sort of into more of that side in terms of the streams that you approach this with, like the different mindsets that you organize across how you're looking at building that?
Yeah. So I think of sort of having impact in three different ways. So usually the first way is people that are directly working or building products that are solving real user problems.
Mhm,
The second way is building products that are directly saving or improving lives. So I think this would be something more similar to what I'm doing at Taimaka because I know
mhm,
that these apps are literally being used by like doctors and nurses to
yeah,
treat children with malnutrition. And then the third option, which I think is something that more people should explore for people who are not in product positions or even engineering positions, to still have an impact, is just donating money to people who are working on those products. So people that are, like for example, donating Taimaka. You know that this
yeah.
group is knows very well their subject matter and there's numbers to back up their efficiency and cost effectiveness. So if you're not in the position to be building the products and you might not have the interest or the time or whatnot, which is fine, then you can still help out in that way.
So how do people go around finding something like Taimaka or kind of these ecosystems where people are building tech for good and building these products?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a gap and it's taken me kind of a while to fall into the right place. So there are actually a bunch of organizations that are essentially charity evaluators. Have you heard of any of those before or like that concept?
I don't think I've dived too deep into it myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, this is still pretty new for me. So, yeah, just go from the ground up. How do you discover these people? How would you evaluate that? Because a lot of times, in London or somewhere else, we're going around, you see a lot of different charities all across the street.
Mhm.
You
Yep.
see them online, you see them plastered across, but it's very hard to understand how many of these are actually having a significant impact, in terms of the output that the charity has. Like
For
they all have
sure.
nice ads, they all have nice, moments, and like the volunteers on the ground are very passionate, but I'm like, what
Mhm.
about the seniors? What about the actual, direct amount that's going towards the end goal? How
Yeah,
much of that kind of gets filtered in the process? And that path is always very unclear with a lot of charities. So yeah,
yes,
how do you kind of navigate that when you're looking at both the building side, building these things, but then from the impact itself?
for sure. So definitely starting with the charity evaluators. So one example that I think maybe most people have heard of it, maybe it's more of a US thing, but Charity Navigator is an example of one. I think it's good for breadth. So most charities are registered on what's charity called Charity Navigator. You can search up the charity and then they'll have some sort of rating. But I think that's like step
Hmm.
one of
Yeah.
just seeing, out of 0 to 5 stars, how good are they doing? But then there are other charity evaluators that go much, much deeper into, like,
Hmm.
looking at the exact outputs on, like, a per dollar, per pound basis and telling you, "Okay, for X amount of money, you are getting, Y lives saved," or something like that. And so they do all of the hard work that sort of cuts through the marketing, cuts through all the advertisements you might see, and
Yeah.
actually just kind of crunches the numbers for you. So one of the ones that I like quite a lot is GiveWell. They dedicate all they do is research essentially on charities and their effectiveness, cost
Oh,
effectiveness,
cool.
impact, etc. Another one is Life You Can Save. Giving Green is one for climate charities if you're into
Hmm.
that. So I would definitely look at those organizations to see what charities they're recommending because there's no way that I or most people are going to spend time to looking into all of these things.
Yeah.
So I figure just let them do the hard work and then take that research. I particularly found Taimaka through an organization called AIM, which is Ambitious Impact, and
Hmm.
essentially what they do is they research the kinds of nonprofits the world needs. So looking at all of the issues out there and then what gaps in the market there are essentially for a nonprofit
Oh,
and
cool.
then they incubate these charities and bring on founders to actually start them. And so I have known about the organization for a while, and one of there was like a session where a few of them were talking about what they're working on,
Hmm.
and this one happened to be sort of like a techie health one, which is something I was interested in.
Oh,
So I just reached out to them and I was like, "Hey, I've got product experience. Do you need product help?" And I think I wish more people would do that.
yeah.
Of course, you have to have the time. This is one thing that I always put a big asterisk on is like volunteering actually does cost something. It costs something to the
Hmm.
organization. They have to take the time to onboard you or train you, and that's time out of the full time employee's job. So I think if you are going to do this, make sure you have enough. You've agreed on an amount of time that actually benefits the organization, and that you are actually able to do that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's one of the most common things when you're looking at hiring and onboarding people, right? Like any company, any organization, one of the biggest caveats is like, how long is it going to take to train this person up?
Yeah.
And like I said, that is a resource. That is a resource that is being drained from the other side. So if you're not able to commit, then honestly, just pay them the money instead.
Yeah.
It'll probably
No.
help better.
A lot of organizations, the only reason they have volunteers is because then those volunteers are more likely to donate. So that yeah, that kind of leads into the
Yeah,
the third
fair.
point of like sometimes it's just better to just donate. Let the people who are experts in their space and knowing how to do this work very efficiently, just give them the money and resources to continue to do that.
Hmm. Yeah. So talk me through Taimaka. Like, what is it that you're building there exactly?
Yeah. So the way that they work is that previously in Nigeria, pretty much all records, medical records, were all on paper, and it was a very complex form system. It was very inefficient, and it was too high cost for most people to be able to actually get treatment. And so this is where the digital solution comes in. So they built a digital tool that allows more or less the average person, they could call them community health workers, to
Hmm.
just download this app, and then they can intake the children themselves. So the app will guide them through essentially what they need to ask when. And then that will then be passed on to the actual doctors and nurses to say, okay, these children are like very malnourished and they need to be seen this week or today or whatnot. And then that saves time, of course, on the doctors and nurses side because then they don't need to spend time on the initial intake. And then the second product that they have is a website that's used by just the doctors and nurses that's just tracking
Hmm.
all of the children. And it's connected across all the different sites in Nigeria. So right now, I think they're serving about 12,000 children. They're planning to scale that up quite a lot. But
Wow.
Yeah, it's just making things more efficient. And even though the
Yeah.
technology might not seem revolutionary or whatnot,
Hmm.
I think it's just applying existing technology in new ways and seeing how
Yeah.
much good that can do.
No, 100%. I mean, that's really cool. So I guess you're probably the only product kind of person on that app, right? What's
Yes.
that
Yeah.
like in terms of obviously you have the search side with Reddit and all this, and now
Mhm.
you're essentially leading product in this sort of charitable tech company
Yeah.
in a way.
I mean, I think it's been really fun. I had that biology background, so I still am interested in like health and biology. So it's fun for me in that sense. It allows me to do product in a completely new environment. I did mostly start working with one of the co-founders most closely because
Hmm.
he developed the apps. He was essentially the product owner. And it kind of has turned into actually drilling down into like what the product needs because I think the
Hmm.
product got
Hmm.
built and then since then it hasn't been revisited in terms of okay, these are the bugs that need to be fixed and then does the
Yeah.
product need to evolve. So I spent a lot of my first few months just documenting the product. First of all, there was no documentation of
Hmm.
how the product
Hmm.
works anywhere beyond the
Yeah.
actual product. So I spent probably 2 months making very intricate flow charts that explains how each of the forms work together and the dead ends and the bugs. And then I did a lot of user interviews. So I spent a couple of hours talking to the doctors, the nurses, the community health workers, just understanding like what is not working for you, what features do you want, compiling a huge list for them, and then prioritizing that. And then after that, we were able to onboard a few engineering volunteers, which I manage.
Hmm.
So I
Nice.
figured out the top priority projects, wrote out the specs for them, and then they're working on building them right now.
Wow, that's really cool. You just came in and kind of organized everything there from the ground up in a way. Um, cool. But then, like on that, especially like one thing that you mentioned, I think this is something that both game teams, tech teams, everyone I've worked with, and a lot of product managers themselves often miss out on is actually speaking to consumers, like speaking to users
Mhm.
directly
Yeah.
and getting that feedback, getting that engagement directly from them. How do you conduct a good user interview when you're speaking to these people about how effective this app would be, and especially bringing out some of the more nascent things that they might not have considered themselves? How do you
Mhm.
conduct that in a way that you actually get to their problems and inform sort of the direction that the product is going towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tricky. So I have worked at Reddit with quite a few user researchers. So I tried to more or less mirror the language that they use to try to not be leading. If you're using a point scale, don't use, I think it's an even number or something. Some of those
Hmm.
more or less best practices that they use. Of course, I don't have as much time to go as in depth as those user research studies, but I tried to cover the high level questions of, what is hard right now about your job, for
Yeah.
example, and then seeing, what of that is actually involving the tech products, as well as they actually had quite a few feature requests anyways. So I would just
Okay.
ask, what is something you wish
Yeah.
existed? And quite a few people were like, oh, well, I'd like to be able to do this. So I would say it wasn't actually that difficult to get product ideas from people. Because I think, well, first of all, that was the first time that these kinds of things have been done. So there was plenty to talk about. But yeah, I think it can be tricky for sure to make sure you're not leading people into questions and being like asking about a specific product before they've even
Yeah.
brought it up.
Yeah, you don't wanna be like, "Hey, this would be a really cool thing, right? What do you think?" And then
Yeah.
they'll be like, sure," because nobody wants to say no. Okay, no, cool. But this is a really cool thing that I think you're working on. I mean, what got you into the whole charitable side? You seem very passionate about it. It seems like a very cool thing that you wanna kind of be building, and I know we've discussed sort of Tech for Good before and those initiatives. What got you into that stream, and where would you like to see that go and grow both, in the UK, the wider world in general?
Yeah. I think I've always just had some sort of drive since I was young that like, hey, I want to help out other people. And I think a lot of people have that as well. But
Mhm.
then it's very easy to get stuck in the, well, what do I actually do
Yeah.
state?
Yeah.
So I think this started out as, oh, I'm going to be a vet. I'm going to help people like by helping their animals. And then I just realized that I think technology can reach so many more people. So I was like, okay, bigger scope. So then switch over to technology. So I think that interest has always been there. And it's just a matter of finding out how I can actually be helpful.
Mhm.
So there's quite a bit of like reading and groups and stuff about this. But I would say the two ways that I usually break it down for people are if you have the time, volunteering with organizations that have done a lot of research about their intervention. There are a lot of
Hmm.
interventions that are out there and might be very popular, but they're not actually that effective.
Yeah.
So just seeing, have there been randomized controlled trials that prove that this intervention is actually working? And then also looking at the numbers of the organization, like when you get $500, and what do they do with that? And is it going towards what you think it's going towards? And again, that's what the like charity research orgs will do for you. But
Hmm.
that's something to check out. And then yeah, the second option is just donate directly if you don't have
Just
the
donate.
time.
Yeah.
And follow the same process. Do your research, do a bit of digging, and with stuff like Perplexity and ChatGPT, it's easier than ever to just be like, okay, give me a set of charities that follow XYZ criteria and show me that they've, I don't know, gone through randomized controlled trials or something, or are particularly cost effective.
Yeah. No, I mean that's really cool. Are there any problems that you see in the world that you're like super passionate about solving or wish you could kind of one day tackle?
Yeah, I think global health in general is something that is very interesting to me. Mental health as well, climate change, etc. Diversity in tech is another big one. I think
Yeah.
it's very important that the people building these products that are for millions and millions of people are representative, which is not quite where we're at yet, but working on it. But yeah, there's so many issues in the world, and it can be really hard to sort of prioritize them. But there's actually
Mm.
a really useful framework that I use. It's like the ITN framework. Have you heard of that one before?
No, I don't think so.
Let me see. Let me remember what exactly it stands for. But essentially, it allows you to break down a problem and help you understand if it's something worth working on. So the I stands for importance. T is tractability. So that means like,
Hmm.
okay, if you were to try to change something about this problem, like, is it actually going to make a difference? Are there any ways that you can make an impact? And then neglectedness is the third thing. So it's like, how many people are working on it? If there's a million other people already working on this problem, like, would your time be better used
Yeah.
somewhere else? Yeah.
Okay. No, I think that's a really cool framework. That's definitely a good one that, I mean, for any product you kind of should go through, but most people don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, that's a good framework to know. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I guess just I mean slowly wrapping up. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of share, talk about what you're doing, apart from obviously the Reddit and then helping with charities? I know you mentioned you also have an Instagram community and you're looking to build a tech for good community itself here in London. Any other kind of things you want to mention on that side?
Yeah. So I think one thing that I'm really interested in exploring is I know what I'm passionate about. I think it's important that we're, building a more diverse future in tech, as well as
Hmm.
being very intentional with how we're developing technology. So I am curious to learn more about people who are interested in doing good, whether that's through building products directly or donating or whatnot, and just how I can help them. Because, like you mentioned, I think a lot of people want to do good, but then they get stuck in this, like, well, there's so many options, so I just don't do
Yeah.
anything. So I think, yeah, if people want to reach out on LinkedIn or Instagram, whatnot, I would love to talk to more people and better understand how I can help. What kind of content would be interesting to them. I'm doing quite a few speaking things around these topics soon, but if there are any like organizations that are interested in talking about it as well, like, I'd be happy to do it there as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely include all the links in sort of the description to this podcast so everyone can come find you and, spam you for coming to all these talks. But yeah, it's been really cool to, have you here and, learn about Reddit, about the product journey there, and then also about the work that you're doing on the charity side of things. And yeah, like all sort of the different frameworks and kind of mindsets that you've shared. So thank you so much for being here. It's been a really good hour.
Yes, thank you for having me. This is great.